So we've got some huge Leagues of Votann rules reveals today. We've got gun profiles, judgment tokens, stratagems and a warlord trait, and perhaps most interestingly of all, it seems that the faction might be getting Armour of Contempt but on steroids. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today I thought we'd do a roundup of Games Workshop's new Leagues of Votann previews. So far they've only given us a few tantalising teasers of the rules for the faction, but today we're getting a rather solid look at the way that the army will play, as Games Workshop have just uploaded a battle report to Warhammer Plus, which by the very nature of talking through an entire game, it sort of means they can't help but reveal quite a lot of rules about the army. The battle report is Votann vs Guard, aimed to be a fairly casual crusade battle report against some Ventrilian nobles. Not all that long, only 30 minutes, and quite a small game at 25 power level. I guess it's kind of interesting that they chose Guard, seeing as they're one of the weakest armies in the game right now. Plus, interestingly, they're the codex that's not getting their codex till after the Leagues of Votann apparently, so it is kind of ironic to see the new squats beating them up in a battle report. I guess small games can always be a bit swingy, but this one was rather brutal. The Votann seemed to wipe out about half the guard in the first turn. Still quite a fun and watchable little battle report though even so, mainly for all the interesting details about the new squats. In the report we've got rather a lot of rules previews, we've got some unit stat line hints, a bunch of details about their new weapons, really quite interesting judgment token mechanics, this new void armour that looks like super armour of Contempt, and quite a few in-faction rules for the Greater Chthonian League. That seems to be one of their sub-factions within the Codex. The Votann list that was being run was 25 power level, which might well represent the launch box contents. We'll find out, I guess, whether or not that's accurate tonight, and I'll certainly do a review of any reveals that we get from Nova. The army list was a Karl armed with a Vulcanite blaster and concussion gauntlet, 10 Hernkyn Warriors with a missile launcher, 3 Hernkyn Pioneers with a great big rotary cannon on one of the bikes, and 5 Ironhair Hearthguard with a sergeant with a concussion hammer. If they were going to do a launch box for the Votann, that would look like a pretty reasonable one to go with. If you're going to imagine them redoing new squats, then I can imagine that including exo armor and trikes would be the thing that you'd ideally want to do. Both of those kind of iconic units for the faction back in the day. In any case though, let's get into the actual rules previewed. First up we have Void Armour. This one was one that was mentioned about halfway through the battle report, and seems to represent the Votann's hardened spacesuits, and has a little bit of flavour text as to why they're really quite strong. I think it was always anticipated that Votann models would be quite tough. It'd be hard to imagine a faction of space dwarves that weren't kind of hardy, and it did kind of surprise me that on the previous faction unit previews their save was only a 4+. I guess this is why, because it's a 4+ save that's layered with a couple of special rules. First up they get basically the Armour of Contempt rule. First up they worsen AP by 1 to a minimum of 0, and it does look like it'd be another faction where AP-1 is basically meaningless. I guess we don't 100% know whether or not this is going to apply to just their foot troops with the void suits, or whether or not it would apply to their vehicles as well. My guess would be it would probably be the entire faction just for simplicity. It certainly applies to both the infantry and bikes though, as was demonstrated in the battle report. For example, the Hernkyn Pioneers apparently have a 4+ save, but we're still saving plasma guns on a 6+. On top of that though, this faction-wide rule seems to go beyond Armour of Contempt, as it means that you can't re-roll wound rolls or damage rolls against them in general. A few armies have been getting that post Armour of Contempt. Things like Salamanders or Iron Warriors have both picked up that rule. It's a bit of a weird defensive buff, as it's really useful against some things but not against others. Say for example, if your opponent took a Primaris Lieutenant along, and he'd basically be doing pretty much nothing command-wise against the Votann, which does feel a bit weird. It also means they'll blunt certain things like Lightning Claws or certain Warlord traits, and you wouldn't be able to re-roll damage results against them with a command point. That last bit is fairly universal, and it could be quite annoying to face them. Overall, it certainly seems promising for the faction, but as to whether or not they actually wind up really being tough or not will of course depend on the points cost and the unit profiles. It is perfectly possible that they could have a really powerful rule like this and still be a bit more fragile than most people would like. AP0 weapons seem like they're actually going to be fairly effective against them. Stacking mass saves on 4+ armour doesn't sound like the worst way to go. Next up we've got Judgement Tokens, a rule that wasn't quite as clearly spelled out on the battle report, but just from the way that it works in the game that we've got quite a few hints. From context it does look like it might well be the pure Votann special rule, say the equivalent of Space Marine combat doctrines or Eldar battle focus. It said in one of the rules that you can't use Judgement Tokens if you're mixing two different leagues, say similar to Necron command protocols. Currently we don't even know whether Votann can ally with other factions. They might be able to, or they might not, but my guess is that if you can field them as allies in some way, you're not going to be able to use Judgement Tokens in the force. It seems that Judgement Tokens are a mechanic that you hand out to enemy units that have offended you, and it really does feel like quite a good fantasy dwarf type mechanic. Maybe you write down a unit's name in the Book of Grudges, and then you mete out vengeance against them. It seems that each enemy unit can gain up to 3 Judgement Tokens. It's not clear if they can be expended or lost in any way. My guess will be that they just get acquired until you've got 3, and from then on that unit is going to be easier to kill. First up, it seems like perhaps the most simple and reliable way of doing them is that the Karl can nominate 1 unit to get 1 whenever he's in line of sight of 1. There's a rule called Grim Efficiency, and it happens in the command phase, which is kind of important as it sounds like it wouldn't be able to move and then give them the Judgement Token. You'd have to have him in line of sight of the enemy before he's moved. It seems that you get 1 for killing a Leagues of Votann unit as well. For example, in the battle report, they killed some Hernkyn Pioneers, and that granted the squads that had killed them a Judgement Token. That was the only Leagues of Votann unit that actually died over the course of the game. Again, makes sense, kill their kin and they're going to get more angry at you. Then it looks like there's some sort of army-wide league custom to counter targeting units as +1 judgment. Not entirely clear how the leagues get that. Maybe there's a custom trait and a actual league trait that you get, kind of similar to Tyranids. And it does seem that the Greater Chthonian League also has an option for 1 command point to deal out an extra Judgement Token when the Karl nominates a unit. Finally, from those league stratagems, it seems that the Votann Searchlights have the option of dealing out a Judgement Token as well. I'm going to guess that they'll appear on some vehicles. I'm not sure whether that Sagittor will have one, or whether it might be something else. In any case, via all these mechanics, it sounds like you can get up to a maximum of 3 of them per unit, and though it wasn't enormously clear in the actual battle report, Games Workshop have basically confirmed the way that that works later on. It does seem in terms of damage, then if you have 1 Judgement Token on you, you do get unmodified hit rolls of 6 wound the target. For 2 tokens you get to wound them on a 5+, and for 3 you get to wound them on a 4+. There's nothing to say that it applies at range any less than it does in melee, which would look like it's a pretty powerful and dangerous ability to be honest. Skipping the wound roll entirely and potentially on a 4+ is pretty mad. It looks like it'd be maximally powerful against really big tough things like perhaps Imperial Knights or enormous units of Terminators blocked up. Maybe a little bit less useful on lots of multiple small units, as then it's barely worth getting a Judgement Token on them as they'll just die anyway. In any case, does sound like quite a fun mechanic, very Space Dwarf all in all. Next up, perhaps the biggest stat reveals that we got were for the Hernkyn Pioneers. It seems that they've got some sort of rule for either deploying a little bit further forward or doing a pre-game move. It did seem that they started a bit forward in the battle report, and they reference a ranged Outriders special rule previously. It would make sense for scout bikes, I guess, maybe kind of similar to those Eldar Shroud Runners. We don't know just how many points these guys would cost, but it does seem that they come with rather a lot of rather scary shooting. The big one with the 2 riders has a few weapon options, but the one that was showed off here was the high-last rotary cannon, 9 shots at strength 6, AP -2, and I strongly suspect with that profile on this bike it's only going to be damage 1. Damage 2 will be pretty crazy for a gun that size. Still though, quite a high quality anti-infantry weapon, chews through light infantry, will threaten heavies. Each bike also packs a Magna Coil autocannon as well, heavy 3, most likely strength 7, AP -1 and damage 2. Again, a pretty good generalist profile. If it follows other autocannons, it's probably going to have a 48-inch range. And finally, they come with bolt shotguns as well. 2 shots, I believe maybe strength 5, AP -1. They might come with that shotgun special rule where they gain extra strength if they're very close to the enemy. Really quite a lot of shooting to threaten light or medium infantry there. Maybe aren't going to hit super hard against anything with -1 damage or Armour of Contempt. In combat it seems that the big bike gets 4 attacks and the regular bikes get 3. Probably don't get any sort of special combat weapons, the models don't have them. And they did have a Mag Rider stratagem for 1 CP, a -1 to hit at range, and if the unit happened to advance they can't reroll hits either. My guess would be though that these guys are probably not going to want to advance. I'm going to bet that their weapons aren't assault weapons, so will probably just be wanting to move their normal amount, though I bet that will be quite a good number anyway. Next up we've got the standard issue faction leader called the Karl. He's an HQ choice, and the one in the battle report was armed with a Vulcanite Disintegrator and a Mass Gauntlet. The Mass Gauntlet struck with 4 attacks, normally hitting on a 2+, but it's -1 to hit, so hitting at 3s. They didn't clarify its strength, though I'd be surprised if it wasn't 8 or higher, and it hits with a big AP -3 and damage 3. Pretty hefty power there, it's a stat line that's slightly better than a Space Marine Thunderhammer. On the defensive side, he's got toughness for a 4+ invul, and I think it was 5 wounds. Overall, it looks like he is looking fairly comparable to a Space Marine captain. It wasn't particularly clear if he had any reroll auras or anything like that, or if Judgement Tokens were just his main thing. This one also had a Warlord trait and a relic as well. The Warlord trait was a long list, giving us 3 different benefits. He ignores light cover with his ranged attack, he ignores Lookout Sir if the target has a Judgement Token, and if any Votann unit kills a unit with a Judgement Token, then one unit in his line of sight also gains a Judgement Token, done at the end of the phase. Seems like quite a powerful way to redistribute the judgment around, presuming it is going to be a strong mechanic that they want to use. That looks like it's one of the generic Votann Warlord traits as well, not a Chthonian League one, as it seems to be numbered 3 on a list. They also mentioned that he was equipped with a relic called Actor's Fortress. This one supposedly slows nearby foes somehow. I guess could be some sort of movement phase debuff, or perhaps a fight's last mechanic, which would be quite handy on a fighty character, I suppose. Otherwise, we got a few interesting hints from the other units mentioned. They showed off an L7 missile launcher for the Hernkyn Warriors, which I don't believe that we've seen so far. This looks like it will be, again, a souped up version of Imperial technology, able to fire anti-tank missiles or anti-infantry ones, a choice of different weapons each round. They did confirm that the squad can all take Autok pattern bolters as a loadout. I don't think that we yet know whether or not that ion weapon is a whole squad loadout or just a special weapon in the unit. It could be either. Then finally we've got a 1 command point combat medic stratagem that allows them to resurrect D3 models slain from the dead. Seems like really quite a handy stratagem. I guess it depends how many points it includes to take a combat medic. Next we've got the Hearthguard. They appear to be perhaps toughness 5 and 2 wounds, though it wasn't entirely clear. That is kind of determined by lasguns shooting them. Perhaps their main durability comes from that void armour, I suppose. The squad they had, the sergeant was armed with a concussion hammer, and the rest of the squad were armed with plasma gauntlets. The concussion hammer didn't actually get to wound, so we didn't see what it did, but it gets 3 attacks hitting on 4s, and the plasma blade gauntlets also get 3 attacks each hitting on 3s. It might be that they offer you an additional attack if you are equipped with them. They also struck with plasma weapons and grenade launchers in the shooting phase. It seemed to be enough to stack some heavy damage on light infantry units. Finally, we got a bit of interesting stuff about the Great Arthurian League. Their League custom, which seems to be the equivalent of Chapter Tactics, is called Ruthless Efficiency. This one counts them as extra models for objectives, which never really hurts, 2 models for infantry units, or 5 models if they've got more than 9 wounds, and in addition they get one of those rules that is just a general damage boost across the army, re-rolling a single hit or wound each time one of their unit attacks. They did specify that for the 2 models thing, apparently cog models don't count. From what they were saying before, it sounds like cog robots are a bigger class of robot for the Leagues of Votann, which haven't been previewed so far at the time of recording. I was just a little bit confused by this, as it seemed like they had this League custom and also the one for extra Judgement Tokens in play. It does make me wonder whether or not they might get this at base and then get the option of a selectable one, perhaps in a similar sort of manner to Tyranids. Plus, as mentioned before, they seem to have a 1 command point stratagem for an extra Judgement Token bestowed by a Karl from his Grim Efficiency ability. Finally, in an update that Games Workshop dropped halfway through when I was making the video, they have confirmed the power level of all of these units, which do give us a bit of a hint as to the points cost. The Karl's 4, so maybe around 80 points. The Hernkyn Warriors are 7, so perhaps around about 12 points per model potentially. I imagine that the power level might include some of their fancy kit like the missile launchers. The Einherjar Hearthguard are 9, so perhaps something along the lines of 35 points there. The Berserks and the Hernkyn both are 5, implying that they could be around about 100 points for the unit. The Sagittars are a bit more pricey than I might have guessed, perhaps somewhere around 140 points, and the Brokir Thunderkin are 5 again probably around about 100 points-ish. Power level definitely doesn't tell us everything, and sometimes it does translate a bit weirdly, but interesting to have a rough scope of the units. Overall, rather a lot of fun news for the Leagues of Votann then. Quite cool to actually see the army in action and get a rough idea of how it might function, though of course it sounds like we've only taken a look at some of the units, and there's going to be lots more to come, and plenty more in the codex I'm sure. Let me know what you make of the rules down in the comments below. How do you think they're going to impact the game of 40k as we know it? I look forward to hearing your takes down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly be trying to keep up with the Leagues of Votann news and releases as they come out. I'm sure we'll get some other cool news from the Nova Open today, and I'm going to be covering that here on the channel. Feel free to subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find it down in the video description below. The Patreon page is what allows me to keep on making videos on the channel quite so regularly, so if you are enjoying, then any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways. If any of that's of interest, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.